thinking logically, this is going to move us into Boolean logic and focusing on how really one of the biggest things that computers do and are really good at doing over and over and over again is making decisions to do one thing or another in certain conditions. Since 4.1.4, 0.5, 0.6, and so on are all kind of the same, I think we'll mix them up a little bit, but we'll have at least more than one decision-making situation to talk about. Let's first of all look at this. So you ask yourself, well, from 4.1.4, identify when decision-making is required in a specified situation. Is a decision required here? When running this program, will it always run the same way, or is there a decision to be made? There is no decision. You know, we're asking what is the first number, but that's just plugging in a number. There's no difference in the way this program will run. It will always run the same way. So let's change that. Let's make it a little bit easier by saying there are just two students. And let's say these two students are inputting their three numbers, and we want to decide which is the better student, or who's got the higher average. So what we're going to do is change this slightly from being a void procedure, a void function, to being a function which returns a value back, and that value that we're going to return back is going to be of the float type. And you're going to see the way that this works. We're going to return at the bottom, so we're going to return much more on this later, but I kind of need this to make this work. So at this point, return average. So not only is it going to print out the average, we can change this back to be average. Not only is it going to print out the average, but it's going to return that value back to where this sub-procedure was called. And so we can return this to a float. We'll call it maybe first average. And then this will be a float called second average. So a slightly different program here, float, where not only is it doing the input and calculation, but it's returning the value back. And then after it's done that, we can say if the first average, and now we're bleeding into 0.1, 0.5, 1.6, but anyway, let's just do it all together. If first average is greater than second average, then we can print out something to that effect, that we're making a decision here that the first average is greater than the second. So what we will print out in that case is the first was larger, because it would have been. And the way the structure looks, we'll get more into it later on, but it looks else. And all this stuff that I'm doing, if it 3 or 4 videos in, is starting to make you think that there's so much you need to learn, this if-else structure is absolutely fundamental. It's like the word "the" in English, or it's more than that, and because you use it again and again and again and again and again. But anyway, if first average is greater than second average, we print out that. Else, there's only one other case, and that is that, well, actually there is a third, and they could be equal, but let's just disregard that for now. The second average was larger. Okay, so if we were to run a program, and I might as well run this. So here's student, and we'll make it grades, so 80, 85, and 91. Right? That makes sense. And then for the second student, we'll do 90 and 95 and 96. So I think you can see that the second average is going to be larger, and so indeed it says the second average was larger. But it had to make a decision. It had to decide which of these two lines to print out. It had to decide, the program had to decide something. Before it didn't have to decide anything, it was just printing out the two averages. Now it has to decide which is larger. Depending on which is larger, it's going to print out something or something else. I think what I'll do now actually is just skip to 4.1.2 and come up with another situation. But just in terms of the assessment statement before I end here, when a decision-making situation is required? Yeah, here we required a decision, and the decision was accomplished through this conditional question.